Okay, guys, so today we are going to talk a little bit about the Spanish conquistadors, and we're going to focus on three of them in particular. We are going to be talking about Christopher Columbus, who, of course, we've already mentioned, and his role in the West Indies. We are going to talk about Cortez. He is going to go to Mexico, and we are going to talk about Pizarro. He is going to go to Peru. So these conquistadors come from Spain, and what our big focus question is here that I've listed for you is how did this relatively small number of conquistadors, maybe a couple hundred, manage to come in and overtake these large, um, these really large groups of native people who were in the New World? How does that happen? So we're going to focus on a couple of advantages that the Spanish conquistadors had versus those native people who were living here. So you're going to want to have a piece of paper to take notes on this. We will start part one will be on Columbus, and then part two and three you guys will actually be doing in class, and then you can add them onto that same piece of paper. So you want to divide it into three for each of those three conquistadors. Starting with Columbus. So we know that the West Indies was sort of his thing. He is going to land there the first time, and he will land there the subsequent times that he comes. So he will make, I think, 4 major voyages across the Atlantic between Spain and the New World. And in that process, of course, he will be bringing goods back and forth. So he's going to arrive in the West Indies, and when he gets there, he will meet a group of people called the Tainos. So the Tainos are obviously natives who are living in the West Indies. And at first, things go really, really well with the Tainos. They're people who live in these kind of smallish villages. They're farmers. They're growing yams and corn. So those are two things that are native to our part of the world that will go back to Europe with Columbus. They grow cotton. They know how to weave that cotton into garments and clothing. So they do that. And when Columbus arrives, you would think that they would probably like be very uneasy about these people that have just shown up, but really they were super nice to Christopher Columbus, like nice to the point that he thought that they were like crazy. He actually is quoted as saying that they were generous with what they have to such a degree that no one would believe it but he who had seen it. So he's like, you would never believe how nice these people are to us. Um, Despite that, Columbus, of course, is not going to treat them super well. So one of the first big things that is going to show up for the Tainos is that they, of course, don't know what Christian symbols represent. Christianity started in the Middle East, spread throughout Europe, um, but it hasn't crossed an ocean yet. And so the native people have no idea who Jesus of Nazareth was. They have no idea about Christianity. They don't know that the cross represents Christianity and that Christians have great respect for that. And so it was written that they somehow were not being respectful of Christian symbols. This made the Spanish really, really angry. And so this was one of those first things that Columbus got really upset about, was that they were not respecting Christianity. So if you take a step back and look at this, you have to realize that there's really no reason why they should be respecting Christianity, because they don't even know what it is. So Columbus at this point could have taken this as an opportunity to teach the native people. Of course, they've got their own religious beliefs, but he could have taken this opportunity to teach them about Christianity, but instead he takes it as being very offensive, and it makes him begin to look down on the Tainos people. So that's going to be one of the big problems that's going to happen first. In general, as time goes on, Columbus definitely shows that he feels superior to these people, which we will see as the Europeans travel worldwide. They will continue to take over groups of people, and they will treat them as though they are better than they are. So Columbus is no different in that regard. Um, he feels that it is his responsibility to claim the land that they live on for Spain. So he basically tells them, guess what? Your land is my land now. Sorry about that. Claims it for Spain. He takes some of the Taínos people prisoner. He sends them back to Spain, takes them to the king. I don't know if he's doing that as sort of like a show of force for the Taínos people, like, look what I can do. I can take your people. Or if that was more that he was trying to impress the king, maybe, by bringing the prisoners back. But either way, that definitely is not going to lend to very friendly relationships if you are kidnapping people and floating them across an ocean to a country they've never been to. So again, another situation where Columbus was not at his best. Columbus is obviously not going to be the only conquistador. We're going to talk about two other ones, but lots of them will come. And these conquistadors that first land in the West Indies will basically be a repeat of everything that Columbus is doing. So when those conquistadors come and settle in this area, they will overrun these native people. So one thing that they did was they discovered that there was gold in this area, which obviously is kind of, long been something that people want. It's highly coveted. So when they realized in this area, which includes Hispaniola, which today is the Dominican Republic and Haiti, it's the island that has those countries, Cuba and Puerto Rico. That's the basic area that we're talking about. When those conquistadors show up, realize that they have gold there, they're going to steal all of the gold from the natives, and then they're going to make them go look for more. So that's super nice, right? So they are panning for gold the same way that you've probably read about or learned about that people did in California during the gold rush. So they're actually panning in those rivers and whatnot, looking for that gold. They also, so remember I mentioned that Columbus could have taken this opportunity to teach the natives about Christianity. So as these conquistadors show up, they're not going to be friendly about this. They're not going to teach the natives about Christianity so much as they're going to force them. So they're going to make them convert to Christianity, which becomes a huge thing all throughout this region. Of course, the conquistadors feel like they're doing a great thing because they are saving the natives who were heathens and didn't know anything about Jesus. But in the long run, well, they're still pretty much just forcing them into a religion that they know nothing about. So it doesn't work out really, really great. Besides that, here's our gold. So they stole gold from the natives, made them go pan for more, and then stole that from them as well. So one of the biggest things that is probably going to happen with those conquistadors, especially going back to our focus question on how did they beat them, is because they just had better resources. Let me put these on here. So their advantages included better weapons, having armor, having horses, and then the diseases that they brought with them. So let's break these down for a second. So there might have just been a couple of hundred conquistadors who arrive on each of these, voyages that show up. And there's millions of natives altogether. But the Spanish really have a huge advantage with weapons. So the native people are using arrows, spears, maybe like handheld hatchet kind of things. We mentioned like slingshots before. Like these are the types of weapons that they're using. Whereas the conquistadors, Christopher Columbus and his conquistadors, they are actually using guns and cannons, which of course these people have never seen before. It really hasn't been that long that gunpowder has even really been used in Europe. So it's still kind of newish. I mean, a couple hundred years. So they're going to show up with these guns and these cannons, and obviously your gun is going to beat a bow and arrow pretty much every time. So that becomes a thing. Also, the guns are loud and scary and almost seem like an invisible object because that bullet is going to pierce you and you can't see it, but you have this wound. It's not like an arrow that goes through you that you can still see. The Spanish are also going to wear some armor. We don't have like full body armor the way that we did before, but they would still wear like shoulder guards, chest plates, that kind of thing. And so obviously that's going to help protect them a little bit more as well. Horses are one of those things that for me are so strange because when I think of our Native Americans, horses are just part of it. Like I just picture that. And but horses came with the Spanish. They terrified the natives. They'd never seen these animals. It would be like you going to a fantasy land and seeing dragons or something for the first time. It's an animal that they'd never seen before. They are faster. They can carry heavy loads of goods very quickly compared to some of the slower animals that the natives might have been using for this. So obviously you can travel faster and farther in less amount of time, carry those goods. In battle, I mean, it's a huge advantage to be on horseback versus not. We already talked about that earlier this year. But diseases for me is probably the number one reason why the Spanish conquistadors had such an advantage. So we have seen firsthand in the last year what it's like to have a disease where people have zero immunity. It is very, very hard to protect people against something that they have never been exposed to before. And so that's sort of what we're seeing in the beginnings of this pandemic that we've been living through. That's sort of what's going to happen here with these three diseases that I've listed: smallpox, measles, and influenza. So today we've basically eliminated smallpox and measles because we have vaccines for them. And influenza is in general not an illness that people catch and die from very often. It does happen, but usually it's something that you already have issues and then you catch it. It's not the same as it was for them back then. They had never been exposed to any of these three diseases before. They have no resistance to them, and so if they catch it, it is almost certainly going to be deadly for them. This is how the conquistadors are going to basically wipe out village after village after village. And once they realize that they are spreading these diseases and the impact it's having, they will intentionally spread these diseases. So it's almost like when we talked about how the Black Death was spread intentionally by flinging those dead bodies over the city wall. The conquistadors are going to do this on purpose. Now, the conquistadors may have contracted these illnesses like before they came from Spain, carried it over on the ship. Some of them would be sick on the ship, but they would get better because they had had exposure before. They had built up some resistance. So that's where we're going to see the difference here. When we talk about this, how did they intentionally spread it? One example was they would use the blankets that sick people had previously used, and they would give those as gifts to the native people. And so they thought that it was this generous thing, but really it's covered in these terrible, gross germs of somebody who has had smallpox or measles, and now you're just spreading that around the village. So they believe that as much as 90% of the population of native people in the Caribbean died from these diseases in the 1500s. So that's a huge, huge impact on the population, and a massive advantage that the Spanish had, particularly once they figured out that that was an advantage for them.